survey tools or things like Calendar Anything, etc. There were a lot of different tools that would create Salesforce sites. Or if you built any kind of publicly facing pages, you may have put together a Salesforce site. If you deployed a community, there's a Salesforce site behind the scenes. And as I was saying, that site has what's referred to as a public guest site user. So a public guest site user gets a lot of permissions. And if you don't totally set things up properly, those public guest site permissions, oftentimes people set them up without thinking, and they do things like providing view all access and things like that to the account object. When those existed, that meant that the public could, in effect, actually download your entire database. So not a lot of people knew that, and Salesforce proactively started restricting the public guest site user and caused all sorts of havoc because not a lot of people were ready for this. They actually pushed it out once and then finally enforced it. They are now finished enforcing all of the rules, but there are still people out there that have done permission, that have implemented sharing rules against their public guest site user which has effectively exposed their account list. So my suggestion to you, everybody, is if you go to setup and then type in sites, see if you have any sites. And if you do have sites, you may want to take a look at some of this documentation around public guest site access and just confirm that your Salesforce instance is actually secure. But Salesforce is kind of finished with these ones, and this was kind of the last of their permissions, this concept of removing view all, modify all. Any questions on the public guest site stuff? It's a little bit complicated, but it did cause a lot of havoc for people. And a lot of things failed. A lot of communities failed. A lot of functions in communities started failing. And we had to sort out access rights and things like that. Cool. That's a bit of a technical one, but it's an important one because it was the most impactful thing that changed in the system. So this one's cool. So catching potential duplicates before saving. So Salesforce, I'm a big proponent of duplicate rules in Salesforce. It can replace a lot of third-party apps that have been out there along the way, which can be performance and otherwise problematic to the system. So now, if you enable this function, you'll be able to, as you're typing in potential duplicates, you'll actually see Salesforce will give you a warning while entering in a contact or an account or a lead that there is a potential duplicate out there for that record. It's just also showing that the duplicate management in Salesforce is on a really pretty cool roadmap. And we also use it in some of our commercial products as well. So we still run into a lot of people who haven't turned on duplicate management. I have done presentations in the past, and on our website, we do have some blog posts and recordings on just the benefits and the power of duplicate management. So I do use this as a way of sort of highlighting that this is another really good example of how to use duplicate management. Okay, I put this one on here because we, on our client side, we ran into this problem and it was a big pain in the ass. So Salesforce is continuing to invest in the survey application. Salesforce Surveys is free for, I believe, 3 surveys up to a certain number of responses. So you can use it for things like case emails, like when a case closes, send the person an email for a survey. You can use it for NPS score type things, like how are we doing from 1 to 10? Would you recommend us 1 to 10, et cetera, et cetera. But it did have a pretty big flaw in it that made it oftentimes unusable, is that you couldn't iframe it into something else. So you couldn't iframe it into your own product, for example, or you couldn't iframe it onto your website if you were closing out a case or something, or finishing a purchase or something on your website. You couldn't iframe it onto your site. And believe it or not, you actually couldn't put it into the Salesforce chatbot unless the chatbot was hosted on a Salesforce community. So if you had a chatbot on your website and you wanted to say, hey, how did our support do? You actually couldn't use a Salesforce survey in the chatbot because it wasn't in a Salesforce community. Which was an odd restriction and caused people to use third-party applications. So now you can use a full iframe embed and embed it in on a website that is not a Salesforce host domain for the chat, which is a technical thing, but has now makes it so that surveys actually has a wide set of use cases, not just very specific and narrow scenarios. So we are now recommending surveys as kind of our first option when people ask us for things like, how do I do an NPS survey, or how do I do a case completion survey, things like that. Salesforce survey is now becoming sort of our #1 recommendation. And then we're looking into, third-party options like get feedback and these kind of things.
When you're on these surveys, Andrew, how is pricing compared to third-party surveys?
So it gets expensive kind of quickly, but it is free to start. So I forget the exact number, but I think it's 3 surveys you get for free. You can set up.
I think you get 300 responses for free and 3 surveys to play with.
Yeah, and then you pay for responses. The responses aren't crazy expensive. So you would want to talk to your account executive, but it's 300 responses usually is enough to get you kind of started on some stuff, unless you're obviously in a higher volume situation. Like if you were getting, handful of cases a day, you're probably within the 300. If you're getting 100 a day, well, the 300 is not going to work for you.
Is it 300 for a year or for lifetime, or?
Those will be monthly, I believe.
Monthly.
Well, yeah, I believe those are monthly. I have to double check that, but it's a usable number that you can get going on, and then the incremental cost isn't huge to get to like 1,000 or 2,000.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I've cherry picked some of these things off the list. So this is another one that I kind of like. We've finally done our first high velocity sales implementation. So high velocity, so something that doesn't get spoken of too much unless you talk to a Salesforce sales rep in a new deal scenario. So high velocity sales is a product that Salesforce offers. It is a paid product, but it's not particularly expensive. But it's a paid product that allows you to do sequences, or what they're referring to as cadences. So what is a cadence? A cadence is the idea of taking a record and putting it into, essentially think of it like a Pardot style drip campaign, where it's going to send email 1 on day 1 and email 3 on day 3, and prompt the salesperson to do a phone call, and then tell them to do 2 other steps or create a task or something for them. So that's what a sequence, that's the idea of a cadence is. It's in a marketplace called Sales Engagement Tools. So you can now use cadences on opportunities, accounts, contacts, and leads. So why is that important? So think of something like you create an opportunity and assign it to a salesperson, and there are 4 follow-up steps that they should always do. Those 4 follow-up steps, can just be pre-scripted, and you can say, oh, first send an email to them. Second, send do a call. Third, send them pricing. 4th step, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people have kind of hacked this in a lot of configuration, where they've done like a process builder to create a task by steps, or a flow to kind of map out processes and so on and so forth. And high velocity sales is now allowing some of that stuff to just, you create these kind of user-friendly automations to achieve these kind of things. The deck will be sent to you. There's some other resources on just what high velocity sales is all about and what it does. It is a paid add-on, but it is what Salesforce is now selling, and they don't sell Inbox as much, and they're starting to sell this more aggressively, and you may see it come up at your time of renewal and so on and so forth when you're talking to them. Generally speaking, you have to be in a higher volume situation to have this feature or tool be relevant to you. And when I say higher volume, I mean, you're getting at least dozens of leads, or, you're outbound prospecting 100, 200, 300 accounts a month kind of numbers.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
How is that different than Einstein next specs actions? I haven't really looked into that either, but I just was curious. What you're explaining is it seems to be a next specs actions. How would that be different? Or
Yeah, good question. So the Einstein next best action, anything that's prefaced with the word Einstein is in the Salesforce AI world of things. So next best action is things like in this opportunity, there's typically three tasks, or this opportunity they typically sells this product, or and it's like looking for other references in the system that says, hey, it looks like you should maybe do this. And it's a very AI style driven approach to things. When a cadence is the opposite of AI. So basically, like a sales engagement lead or a sales engagement manager, or like an SDR manager or a sales manager, someone like that would say, okay, my sales process is when we engage with an account, step one, we have to find the three decision makers. Step two, we have to email them intro to what we do. Step three, we have to remind them about the thing. Step four, we want to nag them again to try to book a meeting. Step five is if we get the meeting, we want to do, we want to send pricing or something like that. Like I'm just kind of making these things up. Or like for an inbound lead, for example, if it's a demo request, we want to send a thanks for booking us. We want to put a calendar link in the email. We reply with it. If they don't book it, we want to send them another email. If they don't book it, we want to send them another email. And then we send them value prop emails and so on and so forth. So you like create these essentially like drip campaign style things where you're defining what the actions are.
And then you were saying about inbox. So I use inbox. You think that that's kind of getting phased out, or this?
I don't think it's getting phased out. I don't think it's necessarily getting phased out, but you're going to probably see it merge with this product. So it's ultimately this product is competitive with a sales a space called sales engagement. The sales engagement space are tools like Xant, Outreach, SalesLoft. Those are the major ones. There's some other ones out there that are you buy licenses for these things, and they have all the inbox features as well as the sequence management features.
Okay.
So at some point, I will expect that these things will all merge together.
I think the license is much higher on this. I've seen it. I think inbox is around 15, and this is, I think, listed like 75. So it's a big gap.
Yeah, but you can get this at unless you're buying like one license, you can usually get this at a 50+% discount levels.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, this one's kind of fun because it's kind of interesting because it's a unique count of some people. Very common request comes to us where marketing says, that's great that I'm putting all my people into campaign members. I'm diligently doing all my work. I'm putting things into my campaign members. But when my boss asks me how many accounts did we interact with at that trade show or that or that webinar, what was that number? So typically what we've been doing is doing like roll-ups and stuff, right? Trying to create a unit or using kind of, what's often referred to as like Power One style reporting, where we're trying to get, a unique count of accounts. So 500 people attended my event. Well, how many companies was that? So Salesforce is releasing the concept of tracking accounts as campaign members when you enable it. And there's a trailhead, et cetera, on enabling this whole thing. When you enable it, you can now produce a report called accounts with campaigns. So you'll now be able to see this account, someone at this account interacted across these 3 or 5, 12 different campaigns. Now, if you want the details of who the people were, you're going to do your traditional contacts with campaign members style reporting. But this is making that a lot easier. You could achieve this report in the past, but it's certainly making it a lot easier by enabling this feature and then turning on, creating a couple of report types to do this. One limitation to understand about this one is it does not include leads. So your leads aren't connected to accounts naturally. So it will not include leads. This will only work for accounts and contacts. I think I saw a hand, maybe.
Yeah. Have you actually used this? I just started using it because we were doing a reach out campaign to accounts, but I was wondering, what I noticed is that when you do campaign members contacts, you could put an email in there. Now sometimes you have that email at the account level, but I didn't see it, like when I was looking at the members, it didn't seem to have a place that was showing the email at the account level. I don't know if that was a configuration thing or just wasn't set up yet for that.
So you're certainly not going to get the people's emails because it's an aggregate. Like if you have 5 different contacts from the same account, you're going to get one at the account, so it won't know which email to show. But you should be able to pull all your account fields into your report. You should be able to create a report type. And
No,
then,
I look at it as like campaign members. Like when you have like your campaign members, you could put in their email, their address.
oh, well, you can always just do like a formula field. Like there's a field now in there that's called account, and you can do a formula field now that traverses your account.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Now that I think about it, yeah, that makes sense. Because yeah, I just want, yeah, we were using like the info emails, or sometimes it was just like a general company email, just something if we wanted to set up an introduction call. But yeah, I'll do it that way. I'll just do the formula and then just put that info email for the account. Perfect. Thank you. These are like one of those things that you had to explain to people who never understood it, that now you don't have to explain to them as to why it didn't work that way.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Virginia. I have the next question, I think. I noticed in here it says it's only related to Pardot. Is this not for Marketing Cloud, just Pardot campaigns? It says where this change applies to Salesforce and Pardot additions using the Salesforce to Pardot connector, or is that?
Yeah, it's to all Salesforce. Like the key is like all Salesforce, so like it doesn't really matter to Pardot. Pardot is like if you buy Pardot now, it's like you access Pardot through Salesforce now. So if you're like a standalone Pardot user, you're like sort of half logging in through Salesforce.
Yeah, we have Marketing Cloud. That's why I was wondering if it was.
Yeah, it'll still apply to your standard Salesforce edition. You don't have to have Pardot plugged into it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love this one. I always bring this one up every time someone talks to me about a new feature. This is like the anti-new feature, but I like to talk about why I don't like this feature. So Einstein activity capture, you still cannot report on Einstein activity capture. That's all I got to say about that. There's some technical reasons why. It's a big data store. It's sitting on an Amazon, and it's sitting in this giant Amazon data lake kind of thing, and it can't be real time accessible in all times. Blah blah blah. But still, I cannot explain to you how many times I have this conversation at least once a week, where somebody tries to ask me why can't I report on these wonderful little emails that I can see through Einstein activity capture. Still can't report on them. Don't ask me about reporting on them. You're probably never going to be able to report on them, just as a FYI. So if you did want to report on Einstein activity capture kind of stuff, you are stuck with third-party applications. Okay, so we got a bunch of flow stuff. So we're going to transition kind of into flow. There's a couple ones that I think are really important and really, so preambling some of our flow conversation. What we've been doing with more complicated accounts is we have started to completely, now with some of these new features that are sitting in flow, we are starting to, and pretty aggressively, moving towards flow-only implementations of Salesforce automation. So now Apex will obviously be a place we do a lot of Apex, but so when I mean flow only implementations, I mean disabling workflow rules. So actually turning them off completely, moving all workflow rules into a before save or before insert flows. So those live there, they're more performant. So we have zero, we're moving to a world of zero workflow rules and zero process builders and moving everything into a flow. We do have our, an article on our website talking about the performance benefits and all that kind of stuff of that world. And we are starting to recommend things like, we have I have kind of a presentation that we did internally to my team where we talked about creating even actually a flow framework. So having kind of one flow for your after save scenarios and then branching out to sub flows and things like that and kind of creating what actually looks kind of like a trigger framework from our Apex friends to achieve these kind of things. There's significant performance improvements from this. when you start becoming more complicated. If you are hitting one of two errors very frequently and consistently in your organization, one is CPU timeout limit exceeded, and the other is 101 SOQL calls being triggered by your system. And you're like, I don't know where these are coming from. It is very likely due to some interplay between workflows firing processes, processes firing workflows, workflows and processes firing flows, and all of which fire Apex. And then your managed packages all want to fire all of the above one more time. So those ping-ponging, what I usually describe as like that kind of ping-pong action back and forth that goes on, we are trying to limit that as much as possible by moving everything into what we're referring to as this flow framework. So flows are here, flows are good, flows are here to stay. From a company policy, we are no longer creating workflow rules. We're doing those in before save flows. We're no longer creating new process builders, and we're aggressively migrating process builders over to flows within our overall account base. We basically create like a tech debt backlog with a lot of our accounts, and when we have downtime, we pick those things off. We migrate all their flows, their process builders over to flows. So why do we do that? Because we have all these wonderful features now in Flow. One of the most important is this one. This ability to say, what did the record used to look like? What does it look like now? So what's a common scenario like that? Well, the stage used to be in prospecting. The opportunity stage is now proposal. So I can now evaluate that in my decision. So I can say, when the stage used to be this and now it is this, go ahead and create a task or something, or set a value or set some condition. You can also recreate that sort of is changed scenarios in this one as well. You can say like the prior value is not equal to the current value, like these kinds of rules inside your flows to make them behave much like a trigger, or even what you would have done in a process builder, which is just that is changed element. So when this one came out about 6 weeks ago, this did make it possible for us to move into what I just described, which is that aggressive kind of moving everyone into a flow framework that we're calling it.
Any advice on the naming conversion to be able to read your list of flows much easier and things like that? Because I found this is one of missing pieces. Your process builder didn't have friendly list view. Flows are not even less friendlier, kind of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think so a couple comments on sort of seeing lists of flow, like just the UI of a flow. Yeah, you don't even see the object it's on because it can be super generic. You don't see what it's doing. You don't see what it impacts. You don't see any of that stuff. So we've started moving to a convention of like opportunity before all, which means it's an opportunity. We're using conventions that we use in our Apex triggers. So we'd say like this flow is an opportunity before all, which to me means it's before save and before insert. And that's what it's doing. If we called it opportunity after all, it would be an opportunity. It's after save, after insert. So like the name, like we now know when it fires, we go into that one to go make our changes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's just a naming convention for trigger frameworks. One thing you could look into is just, look into like best practices for naming triggers. Unfortunately, that hasn't been written as much yet on the flow side, but we're following those kind of practices. And one small comment as well. We have just to add to that, because like sometimes I see this in people's flows, is we have learned over the 1.5 to 2 years that you should only have one process builder per object. We slowly kind of learned that over a while when we started realizing like it was really bad. Or some of us did, some of us don't, but some of us who did learn that. But then when we started building triggered flows, we forgot that rule over here, and we just started building triggered flows based on all these different events. So that is very much similar to having multiple flows on multiple process builders on the same object. So we are recommending the idea of one flow per object, and then making sure our trigger events are very specific. I think, Craig, you have a...
Yeah, I was just curious, what was your approach to move from workflow to, and then moving from process builder to flow? Like, did you start with workflow first, put in your sandbox? Like, what was the kind of get started to make that transition?
Yep. Yeah, so what we do with most of our clients is we build a quick spreadsheet and we say, here's all my workflow rules, and here's what they're doing. And then we do the same thing for every node of a process builder. Here's a process builder for this object. It's evaluating this and it's doing that, and having this big old spreadsheet. Because then what we do is we unpack that and we start saying, okay, if I make this a flow, what do I have to do? Okay, if it's a simple field update, when the opportunity stage moves to closed one, check off this box or something. That can actually be now done in a before, say, flow. So those we would target. Say this is going to go to our before save flow. These are all these on object field updates are going to go into a before save flow. These ones that create tasks, those have to go to an after save or after update flow because they have to create records. And then these process builder nodes that do different actions. Some go to my before, some go to my after, and then we just mark up where they're going to go. So now we have this big old list of my process builder my flow definition, and I start building my before save before insert flow, and I start building my after save after flow, and then I just burn down that list.
So when you put everything in one flow under one object, what happens if you have a situation where things aren't working? Do you have to close the whole flow down while you troubleshoot it, or how do you can you segment one piece out where like I mean, everything is interconnected? Then how do you kind of troubleshoot something if it's in production?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair question. So in a perfect world, I'm going to tell you, in a perfect world, you're going to do most of your events. You're going to break up things into invocable flows. That's in a perfect world. So that each of your major aspects of what you're doing, you'd have basically your initial flow would just be a bunch of decisions. It would just be triggering subflows. And then you just disable the subflow that's not working, and then leave everything else the way it is. That's a perfect world.
You could disable a subflow.
Or you burn it back to an old version that's working or something, and then work on that one.
Okay.
So that's in a perfect world. Now, in a kind of in the future world, and if everything did happen to be in this one big giant flow, it does have some of the there's an art to it about just how big is too big for one flow, really. And we're kind of going through that right now because it's a fairly new concept. But I think part of that does come down to some testing, right? It's just, you have to think of building flows now as if you're doing Apex development, and you wouldn't do Apex development in prod, or you wouldn't just make a bunch of random changes in Apex development. Your new flows should go through a pretty rigorous kind of testing cycle to make sure that you aren't going to cause a catastrophic error in production. But you are kind of then, you have one flow that you have to then turn off, and that effectively turns off all your automation, which could be a problem.
Thank you.
Yep. But remember, you can always go back to an older version that works, and then just go from there. But all right, so we were really excited by this one. This opened the doors to a lot downstream in terms of what we're building out, and we're really excited by the just the roadmap of flows. We're actually even having a lot of arguments with developers where we're doing we're doing all this other work in a flow now, and but they do a bunch of code. And they're like, why didn't you put this in code? Well, because we're answering things like, we know the record volume, and then we know we're not going to exceed certain limits, so this is a good use case, and we're going to call your code now as a node in the flow, et cetera, things like that. What is this one again? Oh yeah, this is also making it more viable to have one flow per object. This idea of multiple triggering scenarios and multiple time scenarios off of a single flow. So it's just been achieving that one flow per object kind of stuff has been functionally quite difficult because of different scheduled scenarios and different. So this feature now allows you to kind of break that up and have multiple triggering paths as the start. So it kind of resembles more of what the process builder is doing, right? Where you have all these different scenarios and you can branch them out. This one's cool. So to your debugging element. This is making debugging a lot easier. You've always been able to review this side panel. And if you were really, sort of technically astute or wanted to really focus on what it's spitting out, you could trace it. So you'd have this in one tab and you're flowing another tab. And you're like, I got to here, and then I got to here, and I did this. Wouldn't it be nice if it just traced it for you? So it's now tracing the scenarios. Way back in the day, flows hated the idea of null variables, and that would be 98% of why it blew up and failed. But now it's doing null variables a little bit better. So the biggest reason is it's actually going, usually when people have flows that they don't expect, is they have decision elements, and it's actually going down a different decision element than they expected it to go down. And that's the number one reason why that happens, usually because of like a variable that's blank or 0 or nulled out or whatever. So this allows you to kind of put a record into the debug element and then watch it go through. And then you'll see, oh, I didn't realize I went down this path. Okay, well, why did I go down that path? Well, then you can kind of just isolate that and say, oh, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I'll come to this kind of, it's giving us more information on our limits as well. I'll come to that in a second. So this maybe helps you a little bit with that in prod situation, because if you're hitting an error in prod with your big giant flow, well, you can just grab that records ID, put it into this situation, watch it go through the process in like a rollback mode, and you'll see exactly where the error is happening, and then be able to debug the issue pretty quickly. Okay, so what is Process Builder and Flow's dark side? So we've all been encouraged to take everything out of Apex and put it into Process Builders and Flows. The dark side of Flow is that it is not the fastest thing in the world. And flows consume what is referred to as CPU time. So CPU time, for those of you who don't know, you get 10 seconds to clear a transaction. So when you save a record, you upload data, you click a button, which causes a save to happen, et cetera, et cetera. Salesforce gives you a soft limit of 10 seconds. Sometimes it'll let you exceed that limit by huge numbers. Sometimes I've seen people get to 40-second timeout limits. So it'll let you get to these really, really long numbers. But what'll happen sometimes is you'll do a data load and you'll see your first 2 or 3 batches go through, and then the rest will just start failing because Salesforce starts realizing this is taking a really long time and then cuts you off. So that's CPU timeout limit error, which is the dark side of our process builders and our flow conversation. I've been doing this Salesforce thing for 13 years. I would say 2.5 years ago, I didn't even know CPU timeout limit was a thing. It just wasn't a thing. Like we hit it every now and then, you'd realize you had some really crappy Apex going on and you'd fix it quickly and then it wouldn't be an issue. Or you realize you were, peppering a record 100 times a transaction or something like that. And you'd be like, oh, that's bad. And then just remove it. So CPU came up really, really rarely. Now, I would say I spend at least 10% of my week dealing with CPU timeout limit errors. So it is the dark side. So we need to be cognizant of CPU timeout limit errors. So every decision node, every update event, everything that's happening is taking CPU. So Salesforce is giving us much more insight into the amount of time a flow is taking. So if you have everything in one flow and you trigger the event, it's not the easiest thing to see, but at least in the debug logs, we are now able to see how long did that flow take to process. So by seeing that, we can now know, is it good, is it bad, is it ugly? And then that allows us to kind of go into the one that, and if you do have multiple flows in an object or something, you're going to get one per flow, and then we can at least see the ones that are non-performant, much like you would see in the different class methods and things like that in debug logs from Apex, which is how we would have debugged some CPU issues in Apex themselves. Any questions on this one? This one does drive me nuts, but it's getting better. It's getting there.
Hey, Andrew, I did have one follow-up question.
Yep.
You had mentioned a blog post on suggestions for architecting flows. I think, I'm not sure if that's something that already came out or if that's something that's coming out.
Yeah, so we actually, it's on our site. It's something I kind of half-authored, which is just how, if you are getting a large volume of CPU timeout limit errors, more than just like one every now and then, if you're getting consistently throughout the day, or you're getting a bunch of them, we did write a blog post. If kind of funny, if you just search CPU timeout limit error, that post that we have is one of the top, I think, 3 results. And we've even had reports of Salesforce support sharing it to people. So we do go, and I can share it to everyone after this call through the whatever follow-up email is going to get sent out. But it's basically describes kind of what you can do about a CPU timeout limit error without needing to go debug logs and fixing everything. If you're getting that error, we're usually recommending you go from the most obvious problems to the hardest problems. So multiple process builders per object, consolidating into one, ideally consolidating those into a flow, or eliminating your workflow rules, consolidating your triggers, doing all your consolidation work first. If those are still a problem, then looking to things like, we had a client who we had two, if you went through their flow, there were about something like 19 different events that could save to the opportunity. And when it was first built out, a record could hit, let's say 5 of them or 6 of them. And what people don't always realize is that's 5 or 6 hits to the database, which exponentially increases CPU load. So what we did is we removed those and we moved them all to one collection at the end. So we said, hey, this goes to this is an update goes to a collection, this is an update goes to a collection, this goes to a collection. And then we consolidated that at the end and we just saved to a single collection, and then their CPU issues went away. So there are a lot of different approaches to how to build out these flows to mitigate the CPU problems that come up.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. I like to pull these ones out because there are people on my team that complain about Lightning and say it's not ready and it should never be released, et cetera, et cetera. But very exciting. You can now manually share records in Lightning. Just a thing. It's important though, because a lot of portal use cases, for example, rely on that record. Like, I want to share this project record to my community person now, and they would rely on the share button. And we had to create like screen flows and stuff to do that for them if you were going to use Lightning. So this is a nice little thing to have, and was very likely because this stuff wasn't API enabled way back in the day. And then a couple little ones. I just find these funny because there's a person on my team, Rebecca, who is an illustrator in the evenings, and every now and then she likes to turn kind of fun things into illustrations. But you can now move multiple fields onto your report. Kind of nice. You used to be able to do, Lightning, you did them one at a time. She really liked this one, which was you can now have a lot more text in your help text. So your help text can be a lot longer. So you can describe volumes of information that they need to know about this field instead of just a little itty bitty, I think it was like 100 characters or something like that.
Yeah, there is an idea to include breaklines in this help text that doesn't work in Lightning well. If you guys are keen to have it, go vote for it, make it. Just one downside of long text that is one big blurb that nobody can read easy if it's long.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you may want to think about using like like asterisks and stuff to try to break it up somehow and things like that. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. This one's kind of cool. So Salesforce continues to platformize things. We have this nice little, fields function in SOQL. So if somebody asks you, for example, give me a field list, you can go to Workbench, throw fields in a call. You can just select fields from object, whatever, and it'll just, boom, here's a big old giant field list of that object. It's kind of nice if you're just, a lot of times people, when they're doing integrations and stuff, they ask you like, can I see the schema? And you're like, oh, and then like you just you literally copy paste the object page and then put that in Excel and send it to them. So this gives you a full sort of nice little printout, essentially, of field lists on an object. It also can be used in makes your SQL statements and stuff a little bit easier. But do be careful with this one on a very large object. We have customers who have upwards of who are hitting the 900 field limit on opportunity, and that would generate 900, or on account, I should say, and that would generate 900 fields. So be careful with this on large objects if you're doing it in development, because you could time it out. This one's fun. This one's actually really important. So because over the years, we've done a lot of development on this one. to overcome this problem, which is opportunity products not being able to be the parent of something else. So why was this an issue? Like, let's say we were trying to do something like create a invoicing schedule against the product. So here's a product, they're paying me $100 and I want to invoice them 2 invoices of $50 each. So I want to take that $100 and I want to show that I'm breaking it into 2 chunks of 50. You weren't able to do that. You had to create like an extension object. So oftentimes we would do this like shadow object concept to be an extension object, and then we would hang it off of that record and then show it on the opportunity or something. We would have to generate orders and things like that to break things up. We had an ad tech company who wanted to do pacing. Like I sold you $1,000 worth of ad spend, and I want to track each of your monthly ad spends against what I sold you. So I want to see that kind of custom schedule against what's going on. So we had to build a whole thing to do that, where I could have just hung them off of the product lines in this case. So saving a lot of development overhead here, which is really nice. Should you ever want to work with opportunity products. And that's my busted up question page. So yeah, those are the things I found interesting in the release. We're halfway into our next release. Release notes are already out for the next release. So I do encourage you to check those ones out. And if you just always important to go through the new release notes, even if you're just skimming them, look for the product headers, look for the items, look for the features, look for the objects that you care most about. And then there's usually something in there. Me personally, I don't read every line of every release note, but I do skim the high level stuff. I do look at the feature specific things. We don't do a lot of field service lightning, so I don't look at that, but we do high velocity sales stuff every now and then. So we'll skim that, pick and choose a little bit, but yeah, always encourage going through that. And Salesforce is making it pretty easy to go through that. So yeah, it's my time.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.